It's late, you're alone, the lights are dim, the room is quiet except for the faint hum of your computer. You're scrolling through YouTube, half tired and half curious when something catches your eye. It's a video with a distorted thumbnail, static lines, a washed out face. You click without thinking, and what you see doesn't feel like a normal YouTube video anymore. It feels uncanny and far too real. You remember that, don't you? That strange unease that came from watching something that wasn't supposed to exist? That grainy footage that felt like it was meant for someone else? For a while, the internet felt haunted, alive with stories told through static, mystery, and flickering screens. But now it's quiet. The channels that once terrified us? Gone. Silent. Analog horror. That eerie, nostalgic corner of YouTube that once dominated the entire platform seems to have vanished. Hell, the first video I did on this channel was on digital horror. Something similar to analog horror that we're talking about right now. By the way, you should totally check it out. And after I posted that video, I said I was going to do one covering analog horror soon. And while I did get sidetracked for quite a while, by the time I came around to start making that video, it seemed like this subgenre of horror that used to be so prevalent just disappeared. So what happened? Where did analog horror go? Analog horror wasn't just a trend that came out of nowhere. It was slowly built up until suddenly everyone was talking about it. The idea is simple. Take old VHS style visuals, mix in creepy sound design, and tell stories that feel like they weren't supposed to be told. There aren't big jump scares or high production value, but it's all about the vibe really. The static, the old school filters, that quiet sense that something's just a little off. When you think about it, analog horror really leans into one core idea, making the ordinary feel wrong. It could be a fake public broadcast, a weather warning, or an emergency message that starts normal but slowly goes off the rails. It's that subtle shift that makes you feel uncomfortable, like when you're half asleep watching TV and the signal glitches for a second. And just for that moment, it feels like something's trying to reach you. That's the magic of analog horror. It's not trying to scare you outright, it's just something uncomfortable that slowly creeps up on you. The first big name that really set the tone was Local 58. It wasn't flashy or long, but it knew how to make you feel uneasy without explaining anything. Every episode looked like it was pulled straight off an old and local news channel. The kind you'd see when you visit your grandma who lives out in the boonies, far from any big cities. You didn't get any context, you didn't get any answers. You just got weird messages, strange imagery, and the feeling that something wasn't right. And people loved that mystery. Then came the Mandela Catalog, Gemini Home Entertainment, Monument Mythos, and Vita Carnis. These creators took the same idea but expanded on it into whole worlds. Suddenly, YouTube was full of hundreds of these found footage style universes with their own lore, their own monsters, timelines, and fan theories. Viewers became something like detectives, pausing frames, analyzing distorted images and voices, and trying to decode hidden messages. This is what made it fun. You weren't just watching a video, you were figuring it out. Part of why it hit so hard was nostalgia. The VHS look and old broadcast style reminded people of growing up, staying up late, watching TV, or seeing weird stuff on air after midnight. It brought back those memories, but flipped them, making that comfort feel kind of eerie. Analog horror made you realize how much we trust that warm, fuzzy feeling of old technology, and how creepy it can get when that trust is broken. The timing of it all definitely helped too. A lot of this blew up during the pandemic, when everyone was stuck inside looking for something new. Analog horror had this personal, homemade vibe that made it feel real. You could tell it was made by individual creators, not studios, which made it feel more intimate and more mysterious. And because the videos were usually short, they spread easily. One upload could reach millions overnight and kick off whole communities trying to make sense of it. It also kinda spoke to something deeper about being online. Analog horror often mixes themes of control, distortion, and being watched. Things that hit harder now since we basically live on screens. For a while, it really felt like analog horror could keep evolving forever. It was creative, flexible, and surprisingly emotional for something so minimal. But even early on, you could tell that there was a limit. Once you've seen a few broadcast gone wrong videos, you start to recognize the patterns. And that's where the genre started to slow down. Analog horror started as this mysterious thing that felt like it came out of nowhere, but as it grew, it became easier to explain, easier to replicate, and eventually, easier to ignore. But before we get into that part, it's worth looking at how big it actually got. Because for a few years, analog horror wasn't just a niche, it was the face of YouTube horror. So, let's rewind a bit. Back to when analog horror was everywhere. Around 2020 to 2022, YouTube felt like this endless rabbit hole of eerie broadcasts and cursed TV stations. You'd click on one video, and suddenly your recommendations would fill up with them. Strange logos, fake government warnings, and creepy voiceovers that sounded like they came from a different dimension. It was addictive, and part of the fun was never knowing what you'd stumble into next. What really made analog horror blow up was how easy it was to dive into and how deep it could go. You didn't need to sit through a 2-hour movie or buy a $60 game. You could just watch a 2-minute clip and instantly feel something. That short format made it perfect for YouTube and TikTok, and it gave creators the freedom to experiment. You could tell a whole story through one fake broadcast or build a massive connected universe over dozens of uploads. It was creative freedom mixed with mystery, and people couldn't get enough of it. Hell, there was even one about Godzilla. It also helped that the stories themselves were surprisingly emotional. A lot of analog horror wasn't just about creepy visuals, it was about loss, isolation, paranoia, and religion. The Mandela Catalog, for example, mixed biblical themes with psychological fear. Gemini Home Entertainment used fake nature documentaries to talk about something cosmic and hopeless. Monument Mythos took real-world history and twisted it into something surreal and unsettling. Even though the visuals look lo-fi, the ideas behind them were huge. The genre also benefited from timing. Like I said earlier, during the pandemic, people were looking for new things, but they were also looking back into the past as well. Looking at the times before they were stuck at home, glued to screens and constantly refreshing for updates. Analog horror reflected that perfectly. At a time when people were trying to find comfort in the past, analog horror showed a different side to it. It showed us the most uncomfortable version possible. And because it looked cheap and grainy, it felt real. Those low-budget looks weren't just a limitation, it was part of the illusion. You could believe that someone really found an old broadcast or uploaded a tape that they weren't supposed to. That made it so much more immersive than any polished horror short that could come out. A lot of analog horror's power came from how believable it was, or at least how believable it looked. It wasn't over the top, it was quiet, restrained, and that made it even creepier. It's also worth noting how accessible it was for creators. You didn't need any expensive equipment or a big team, just some editing software, sound design skills, and a good imagination. That's why so many small creators jumped into it. Analog horror gave people a way to make something that looked professional while still feeling homemade. It blurred the lines between indie and cinematic, between someone's weird YouTube video and a full-blown art project. And for a while, it felt like this was just the start. New creators kept showing up with fresh ideas. You had projects like The Backrooms taking that same found footage energy and pushing it into 3D spaces. You had crossover styles like The Walton Files, mixing analog horror with cartoon mascots and old VHS training tapes. The creativity was wild, and it felt like this genre could go anywhere. But like all good things, analog horror eventually hit that point where it started feeling a little repetitive. The same tricks that once made it creepy, the VHS static, distorted voices, flickering faces, they just don't hit the same anymore. Once you've seen a few series, you kinda know what's coming. The mystery that used to make it special got replaced with predictability. And in a genre that relies so much on the unknown, that's a pretty big problem. Part of it was just oversaturation. After big series like the Mandela Catalog and Gemini Home Entertainment blew up, everyone wanted to make their own version. And honestly, who could blame them? It was one of the few genres where a single person could make something that looked professional, interesting, and viral. But when the internet gets a formula that works, it runs with it into the ground. Before long, the broadcast interruption format, the creepy emergency warnings, and the static jump cuts became templates instead of storytelling tools. Another issue was pacing. Analog horror is slow by design. It takes its time building up tension. But YouTube changed. The algorithm started favoring faster, more clickable content. Shorts took over and people's attention spans suddenly just dropped. The idea of sitting through a 5-minute build-up with no dialogue just didn't work well for anyone anymore. It's hard for a slow burn genre to survive in such a fast-paced platform. And then there's creator burnout. A lot of people doing these projects were doing everything on their own. Writing, editing, designing sound, promoting, everything. Analog horror takes a ton of work, especially when you're trying to keep a story mysterious but also consistent. Many of the big names either slowed down or moved on to different projects, or they just disappeared completely. The charm of mystery uploads eventually turned into long gaps between releases, and fans drifted away. Another big thing is that the audience just got too good at decoding everything. Half the fun of analog horror was trying to figure out what it all meant. The hidden messages, cryptic symbols, weird timelines. But once people understood the patterns, the mystery was gone. Reddit threads would break down a new upload within hours, and all the speculation and wonder just evaporated. When a story built on secrets stops being a secret, it loses its edge. So yeah, analog horror kind of came and went. It had this massive boom online, especially during the early pandemic years when everyone was looking for something to get lost in. It started off as this cool, creative experiment. A bunch of people playing with VHS filters, creepy lore, and weird broadcasting style storytelling. And it grew into a full-blown movement. For a while, it felt like every week there was a new series, a new mystery, or another hidden message for people to dissect. But after a while, it just got quiet. Not because it failed or anything, but because it ran its course. The internet moved on, like it always does. Trends come and go. And analog horror was just one of those miracle moments. That perfect mix of timing, nostalgia, and creative freedom. Once everyone tried their hand at it, that magic sort of faded. The formula became recognizable. And what used to feel mysterious started to feel predictable. And honestly, that's okay. Not every genre has to stay at its peak forever. Sometimes it's better when something burns bright for a short while instead of dragging on until nobody cares anymore. Analog horror left its mark. It proved that you don't need crazy effects or $1 million budgets to tell a good story. You just need atmosphere, tension, and a story that sticks in people's heads. If anything, analog horror showed that horror doesn't have to be loud or fast-paced to be effective. It can be quiet, slow, weird. It can make you think. It can make you feel uneasy without showing you a single monster. So while the uploads might have stopped and the statics faded, the spirit of it, that creativity, the mystery, the what did I just watch feeling, it's still out there, maybe just not in the same form.